Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We've got a small, intimate group here for our next session. And we're going to be continuing to talk about vulnerable road users. We've got three great presenters. I'll introduce each one of them individually. First is Alison Peller, graduated from the University of Western Ontario with a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering. She completed a master's of engineering in the Engineering in Medicine program. And since graduating, she has worked at Southwestern Collision Analysis in London, Ontario. This is her second time presenting at CARS. Alison, welcome. And bonjour.
Hi, and thank you for the introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. My name is Alison Peller, and today I'll be discussing pedestrian and cyclist fatalities in left and right turn collisions. Pedestrians are amongst the most vulnerable of road users. According to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, there were over 6,000 pedestrians killed in the United States in 2019. 18% of the collisions occurred at intersections, and 21% of the pedestrians were over the age of 65. In Ontario, from 2003 to 2009, Ontario traffic collision statistics indicated 2,634 driver fatalities and 901 pedestrian and cyclist fatalities. A decade later, and in a similar 7-year time period from 2013 to 2019, the number of driver fatalities had significantly decreased, while the number of pedestrian and cyclist fatalities had increased to 933. Transport Canada, in partnership with the Western University Motor Vehicle Safety Research Team, is conducting an in-depth study of pedestrian and cyclist fatalities in Ontario. The study includes a series of retrospective collision investigations into vulnerable road user fatalities. Over 700 death investigation reports were reviewed at the Ontario Office of the Chief Coroner. The current study is based on 504 accidental VRU deaths that occurred from 2013 to 2019. The focus of the current analysis is on the subset of VRU deaths where the striking vehicle was turning left or right. Data on vulnerable road user collisions are needed to predict and assess the real-world performance of advanced driver assistance systems, which are rapidly entering the Canadian vehicle fleet. Advanced driver assistance systems, or ADAS, are one of the fastest growing safety application areas. ADAS are systems intended to help the driver in their driving or parking activities. Examples of ADAS, such as blind spot warning and pedestrian detection with automatic emergency braking, or PAEB, have been available in the market in Canada for several years. According to the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, PAEB is available on nearly 9 out of 10 model year 2021 vehicles. Death investigation reports were reviewed at the Ontario Office of the Chief Coroner for VRU collisions that occurred from 2013 to 2019. The current study is based on 504 accidental VRU deaths that occurred across Ontario, where a post-mortem examination was conducted. The sample represents approximately 54% of the 933 VRU deaths that occurred in Ontario in the same period. The data reviewed includes the coroner's investigation report, the post-mortem examination report, and the toxicology reports. Many of the files also included reports from police and other agencies. Media information such as news articles, collision images, and scene maps and images were collected and developed on all cases as available. Data was extracted using a data collection form for information on the motor vehicle collision, the motor vehicle, and the driver and VRU demographics. Impact speed was estimated through available information and through collision analysis. VRU runover was identified based on police findings such as blood on the tires, undercarriage scuff marks, witness reports, as well as through the post-mortem findings. So to recap, the current study is based on 504 total fatalities. There were 436 pedestrians and 68 cyclists. The striking vehicle was turning left or right in 104 of the fatalities, and there were 93 pedestrians and 11 cyclists. For all collisions, the striking vehicle was a light truck or van in almost half of the collisions at 49%. The striking vehicle was a passenger car in just over 1/3 of the collisions at 34%. Heavy trucks and buses were also frequently involved. Vehicles coded as other were unreported vehicles, hit and runs, and tractors. For the turning collisions, LTVs were also the most common vehicle type at 46%. Passenger cars were less frequently involved in the turning collisions, while heavy trucks and buses were more frequently involved in the turning collisions. For all collisions, the 245 LTVs were comprised of SUVs, pickup trucks, minivans, and vans. For the turning collisions, compared to all collisions, there were less SUVs and minivans and more pickup trucks and vans in the turning collisions. Almost half of the turning LTVs were pickup trucks. Vehicles going ahead, meaning traveling straight, was the most common vehicle pre-crash action at 61%. The striking vehicle was turning left or right in 21% of the fatalities, including 21% of the pedestrian fatalities and 16% of the cyclist fatalities. Left turns were the most common turning maneuver in the pedestrian cases, with half involving LTVs. Right turns were the most common turning maneuver in the cyclist cases, and all involved collisions with heavy trucks. The ratio between the number of turning collisions compared to going ahead collisions was calculated for each vehicle type. From this, it was seen that heavy trucks, buses, pickup trucks, and vans were much more frequently involved in the turning collisions compared to going ahead. And it was also seen that passenger cars were much less frequently involved in the turning collisions. Seniors over the age of 65 accounted for 33% of the overall fatalities. However, this group accounted for a much larger percentage in the turning collisions at 55%. The percentage of seniors was greater in the left turns at 57% compared to right turns at 48%. Females over the age of 65 accounted for 20% of the overall pedestrian fatalities, while senior males accounted for 16%. However, senior females accounted for 40% of the turning pedestrian fatalities, while senior males comprised of 15%. Seniors were more at risk and disproportionately represented in the turning collisions. Senior females were observed to be particularly vulnerable in the low-speed left turn collisions. Fatal collisions with turning vehicles tend to occur at low speed in the 10 to 30 kilometer per hour range and frequently involve runover of the pedestrian or cyclist. VRU runover occurred in over half of the turning collisions, including 39% of the left turns and 73% of the right turns. Most of the vehicles involved in the runover collisions were heavy trucks, pickup trucks, and buses. All the cyclists that were struck by a heavy truck were run over. The cyclists would frequently travel under the right side of the turning vehicle prior to runover. VRU runover did not occur in 39% of the collisions, including 21% of the right turns and 48% of the left turns. Many of the vehicles involved in the non-runover collisions were passenger cars, where the struck VRU would often wrap onto the hood of the vehicle before falling to the pavement. Many of the non-runover VRUs were seniors over the age of 65. The majority of the collisions occurred in urban areas and at intersections. The majority of the intersections were four-leg and controlled by traffic lights. The speed limit of the vehicle approach road was 50 kilometers per hour or less in 83% of the collisions. Many of the pedestrians were struck while crossing in a crosswalk. And the majority of the collisions occurred in daylight or at artificially illuminated intersections. A collision configuration was assigned to each of the collisions using a standard template developed by Transport Canada. Configuration 7 was the most common configuration overall and in the pedestrian cases. In this left turn scenario, the VRU is crossing the roadway in the opposite direction to the vehicle as it approached the intersection. Configuration 6 was the second most common configuration, with the VRU crossing the roadway in the same direction as the approaching vehicle. Configuration 1 was the most common right turn configuration and involved both pedestrians and cyclists. In this configuration, the VRU is crossing the roadway in the crosswalk and is crossing in the same direction as the approaching vehicle. Configuration 5 was the second most common right turn configuration and only involved cyclists. In this configuration, the VRU is on the roadway to the right of the vehicle and is crossing in the same direction as the approaching vehicle. For all the turning collisions, the average impact speed was 19 kilometers per hour. In the left turn configurations, the impact speed ranged from 5 to 35 kilometers per hour, with an average of 22 kilometers per hour. In the right turn collisions, the impact speed ranged from 5 to 20 kilometers per hour, with an average of 11 kilometers per hour. The occurrence of pre-impact braking was assessed for each of the turning collisions. There was no evidence of pre-impact braking in 97% of the right turns and 86% of the left turns. A review of 504 unintentional VRU deaths was conducted with a focus on the subset of collisions where the striking vehicle was turning left or right. The striking vehicle was turning in 21% of the pedestrian fatalities and 16% of the cyclist fatalities. Fatal collisions with turning vehicles tend to occur at low speed in the 10 to 30 kilometer per hour range and frequently involve runover of the pedestrian or cyclist. A common thread in the turning collisions is the lack of collision avoidance and pre-impact braking, indicating the drivers did not see the pedestrian or cyclist prior to impact. PAEB systems could be of great benefit in turning collisions, where only a short duration of pre-impact braking would be sufficient for injury mitigation. The majority of the collisions occurred in daylight or at artificially illuminated intersections where the current generation PAEB systems should be effective. In 13% of the turning collisions, all involving pedestrians, The collision occurred at the entrance to the intersection when the striking vehicle was just beginning to turn. The current generation PAEB systems should be effective at preventing these low-speed collisions, as the striking vehicle is primarily traveling straight at impact, and the VRU is crossing in front of the vehicle. Overall, configurations 7 and 6 were observed in over half of the turning collisions at 62%. PAEB systems that could detect configurations 7 and 6 are most important for the mitigation of serious VRU injury in turning collisions. Heavy trucks were overrepresented in the turning collisions, and particularly in the right turn collisions involving cyclists. Blind spots and visual obstructions clearly played a major role in these collisions. Drivers often had the opportunity to note the presence of a VRU prior to reaching the intersection. An earlier Canadian study found that collisions with heavy trucks are frequently due to the inability of the driver to note the presence of an adjacent VRU. A turn collision warning system could be effective at reducing right turn collisions. PAEB systems could potentially be of substantial benefit in the prevention and mitigation of VRU turn collisions, which frequently involve low-speed frontal impacts and runover. However, the potential for false positive detection is an area of great concern. Further development of PAEB systems is needed, as well as testing in different collision configurations. Predicting the effectiveness of future ADAS systems is difficult, as their field performance characteristics are rapidly changing. Continued monitoring of VRU fatalities will allow for the assessment of the performance of the real-world performance of PAEB systems as they become more common in the Canadian vehicle fleet. The fatal VRU data collected to date will provide an important basis for the future study of PAEB and other ADAS systems. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Allison. If it's okay with the group, we're going to keep questions till the end, till all three presenters have had a chance to share their remarks with us this afternoon. And I also forgot to introduce myself. That's one of the really important things to do as a moderator. My name is Lorenzo Mele, and I'm a member of the Ontario Traffic Council, their Active Transportation Committee. And tomorrow I'll be doing a workshop on walking audits in the afternoon. So please join me for that. So our next presenter is Michael Stewart. Michael is a community relations consultant for the CAA Club group of companies, the Canadian Automobile Association, Canada's largest CAA club, and has been with the CAA since 2018. He serves as the subject matter expert on numerous road safety files and is responsible for traffic safety education and awareness efforts. Michael holds degrees from Dalhousie University and the University of Ottawa and brings his dedication and passion for road safety to various projects and partnerships across the province. Michael, welcome to the podium.
Oh, perfect. I'm not up there this time. Hello, everyone. Is this in the right spot? I missed my headpiece from yesterday. Perfect. Good afternoon, everyone. As mentioned, I'm Michael Stewart, and I'm a community relations consultant with CAA Club Group. Is it working? Up technology. Great. So just a little bit about us first. So CAA has been advocating for traffic safety, mobility, infrastructure, and consumer protection since 1903. Today, with over 2 million members in Ontario, we continue to work in partnership with transportation and safety experts like yourselves to make sure transportation is safe and viable for our members. We're always looking for opportunities to improve road safety through education and awareness, thought leadership, public policy, and strategic partnerships. So first, I just want to quickly explain why we are here, because when you hear the name Canadian Automobile Association, the first thing that comes to mind might not be cyclists and pedestrians, But with almost half of our members cycling, a quarter actually cycle once a month or more often. And with most of us being a pedestrian in our daily lives, vulnerable road users are a key safety priority for us. And not just that, but cycling safety is actually part of our history. Our founder was actually a champion cyclist who built his own bike to ride across Canada and was a champion of sharing the road safely and talking about different forms of mobility. So that legacy continues in what we are doing today. And this includes our Watch for Bike decals, which have been shared since the late 1990s. Everyone got one in their delegate bag. You can just put it on your side view mirror. We also have our CA Bike Assist service, which is roadside assistance for your bicycle. In case you ever break down, we'll either try and fix your bike or bring you to where you need to go. We also sponsor the Bicycle Friendly Community Program here in Ontario through Share the Road Cycling Coalition. I know Sudbury is a proud member of that list, and the program essentially recognizes communities who are encouraging active transportation and investing in cycling infrastructure. We also encourage our members to practice proactive behaviors like wearing brighter reflective clothing in low visibility situations or practicing the Dutch reach, which if you don't know, the Dutch reach is opening your car door with the arm opposite the door, naturally turns your body to perform a shoulder check. Our school safety team encourages active school travel, and when kids arrive at school at some schools across the province, they will help finish, our CA school safety patrollers will help them finish their journey. We also adopted a vulnerable road user strategy in 2021. And furthermore, we have the ears of drivers. We educate drivers continuously on best practices for sharing the road safely through our magazine, e-letter, social channels, and on our website. So with all that said, I'm here today to talk about a survey we did on vulnerable road users last summer. The purpose of this survey was to measure awareness of the term, measure awareness on safety issues facing vulnerable road users, expectations on how CAA can advocate on their behalf, as well as understanding public's perceptions on emerging and ongoing issues. So first, a quick snapshot of mobility during the pandemic. At the time of this survey, people were obviously driving less and walking and cycling more. But when Ontarians look to post-pandemic, which is hopefully where we're going to, they expect their driving to increase. But a good amount of folks are actually going to be maintaining those walking and cycling habits that they picked up during the pandemic. And this doesn't necessarily mean that people are foregoing their vehicle for a bike for their daily commute. This could just mean that people who picked up walking as a mental health break from working from home, or picked up cycling as a form of exercise, or realized that there was businesses near them that they could walk and bike to. And it took the pandemic to realize that. It doesn't necessarily will impact commutes, but what's interesting from this is we could be seeing that as people return to those in-office commutes, vehicle commutes, they might be interacting with more vulnerable road users than they're used to before the pandemic. And not just more vulnerable road users, but maybe different infrastructure as well that they weren't used to seeing before the pandemic. And speaking of pandemic that wasn't there before, or speaking of infrastructure that wasn't there before the pandemic, the temporary road closures, we did ask about that, and we had 20% of Ontarians did participate in those, which could explain why so many folks took up walking and cycling. And we asked Ontarians about their comfort level using certain forms of vulnerable road user infrastructure, and also if they thought more was needed. So we can see here that there is comfort using what is there, but when we look at cycling infrastructure, it does go down quite a bit. Now, we didn't ask about specific types of bike lanes, so some could be thinking of unprotected bike lanes or even sharrows. And in terms of if there was enough infrastructure, 61% of Ontarians say that improvements are needed to bike lanes, and almost half want more improvements to outdoor lighting, which could help with the visibility of vulnerable road users. And younger and rural Ontarians are more likely to think improvements are needed to our infrastructure. So next, just quickly on pedestrian behaviors. So we asked about pedestrian behaviors, and what's good is Ontarians are generally cautious, but there are areas for improvement. So I should highlight that this was a self-reported survey. So obviously we always like to think of ourselves in the best light, and always like to think of ourselves as good law-abiding people. But when it comes to precautious behaviors, so that's the ones at the top with the green box, Pedestrians are more likely to look both ways before crossing the street, put their phone down or look away before crossing the street, and ensure that vehicles have come to a complete stop. But very few are actually making that conscious effort to wear bright or reflective items during at night or during low visibility situations. Words are difficult today. And when it comes to dangerous behaviors, so that's those bottom three there, the top two scores on the right, that reflects the total of sometimes or never. So we have 9% of Ontarians who are always or most times walking and staring at their phone, which to me seems a bit low. We also have 25% who start crossing when the pedestrian signal is counting down, and also 30% who will jaywalk most times if there are no cars there. And younger Ontarians tended to have lower scores when it came to precautious behaviors and higher scores when it came to the dangerous behaviors. We also asked Ontarians to prioritize the issues that they believe are facing vulnerable road users, and there was overwhelming agreement that distracted driving was the main issue facing vulnerable road users, followed by a lack of courtesy on the roads. Possibly not surprising, 4 out of 5 of these are driver related. And addressing vulnerable road user safety. So first, Ontarians don't know what this term is. We had about 18% who were actually familiar with the term. And we asked this because as road safety professionals, we often use these terms and we talk about different strategies, but we sometimes lose track of what the general public knows because people around us and in our space are using these terms. So at CA, we've started to explain what this term is to our members and using it in articles and messaging and making that connection of how they're vulnerable road users and why this term should be important to them. When looking at infrastructure to promote safety in terms of changes Ontarians support, advanced lead time at pedestrian crossing signals, protected bike lanes, and automated speed enforcement had the greatest amount of support among Ontarians. Probably not surprising, lowering speed limits had the lowest level of support. But I think something that came up during the keynote the other day was that traffic safety is a value in traffic safety culture. I think really diving into that and really embracing that aspect could help with boosting those levels of support and helping people understand that why 30 kilometers an hour on residential streets is important and why it can help keep everyone safe. And last one on infrastructure, to create more shared space for vulnerable road users and drivers to share the roadway, more connected cycling networks, making public transit more accessible to cycling, and more protected bike lanes had the strongest amount of support among Ontarians. The more connected bike network makes sense, just personally, I would be more likely to commute somewhere by bike if I knew that there was a dedicated protected route for me to take and just having that dedicated road space as well. And next, we asked about some road safety strategies that are out there. And I shared earlier how Ontarians weren't familiar with the term vulnerable road users, and it's similar to common approaches to address road safety. So Vision Zero did have the highest level of familiarity among Ontarians, but still it's low. But downtown Ontarians were more likely to have some awareness of this term. And after a definition was provided, we asked about agreement and support, and you can see that there is a good level of agreement that these programs would be successful and some good levels of support as well. So while the majority of Ontarians are not aware, after seeing them, close to 1 in 2 show some level of support and could consider them having a positive impact on vulnerable road user safety. One thing to overcome is that skepticism of Vision Zero. It's a big goal to achieve, so I think there's a bit of skepticism there. And something as well, and I was talking to a colleague earlier about this, was at the start, especially when we look at Toronto, Vision Zero came out as a plan to keep people safe on our roads, and a lot of the justification was there at the start, but then they stopped doing that. And now it's just introducing new measures. And I think a lot of the focus on why Vision Zero is important and why it's keeping our roads safe has been lost. And I think making that connection again for people, and as we see here, once people are aware of these things, they start to grow in support levels, they start to grow in agreeableness that it can be successful. But I think it's important to start making that connection for Ontarians and help building that level of support. And when asked about the most effective ways to promote safety for vulnerable road users, Ontarians listed working with government, advocating for better infrastructure, and social media messaging as their top 3 most effective ways. I think a lot of us in this room and online are champions of working in partnership to try and get the job done. And it's clear that Ontarians want to see that teamwork when it comes to vulnerable road user safety and enact change. We'll just conclude by saying that from our research, we did find that there isn't one specific measure that can improve vulnerable road user safety, but a mix of engineering and education and even some enforcement can all go a long way. And especially when working together to really explain the mission of strategies like Vision Zero, we can really help get Ontarians on board with a lot of these road safety changes. And that's all for me. Thank you.
Great to get those top line results from that survey. And if you just connect the 2 quick dots from the previous presenter and Michael, Allison, your intersections, cars turning, lots of support for controlling intersections. One of those let's just do it kind of things, isn't it? Okay. Our final presenter this session, just as a reminder, this session goes till 4:45. So I think we're going to have some good time for conversation, discussion, but we also may wrap up a little bit sooner than that and have a chance to see some of the posters. I'm sure that they're still up. So our final presenter for the afternoon is Linda Rothman. She is a PhD, is an assistant professor at the School of Occupational and Public Health at Ryerson University. Scientist in child health evaluative sciences at the Hospital for Sick Children. Linda is an assistant professor, status only, at Dalla School of Public Health, University of Toronto. Dr. Rothman trained as an occupational therapist and has clinical experience with children. Her area of expertise is in vulnerable road user injuries in urban environments as a public health issue and has been working in this field for over 20 years. She is an investigator on an internationally renowned pan-Canadian team of researchers studying children's road traffic injuries. Her recent research projects include studying the effects of COVID-19 pandemic on road traffic volumes and collisions in 4 Canadian cities with a social equity lens, which includes the evaluation of new road design modifications, such as cycle tracks, reduced speed limits, and automated speed enforcement. Welcome, Linda.
Thanks everybody for being here. I know it's the last little bit of a long day. First of all, I need to say it's not Ryerson University, and every single biography, auto, whatever that I hand in, I forget to change it. We're not called Toronto Metropolitan University, and I will make many mistakes going forward. The other thing I wanted to say is I wanted to start the presentation acknowledging that this was part of a team project. I was the least important member on this team. My postdoc, Naomi Schwartz, who recently left for Public Health Ontario, was instrumental in writing. It was part of her, it was an extension of her PhD thesis. And she, the main conceptualization behind it was with Ron Buehling. Some of you know him, he's a geographer at University of Toronto, Mississauga. So I was merely the facilitator in terms of providing some methodological expertise, some contact expertise, because way back I did do some clinical work as an occupational therapist in disability, and basically some help with writing and things like that. So neither of them could be here. I'm going to present the work. Don't ask me too many questions, but I know exactly who to refer you to if you've got lots. So this is a disability and pedestrian road traffic injury, a scoping review of literature. And the reason why the 3 of us decided that this should be presented is it's a really important topic. We don't get a lot of content matter at CARSP and other road safety road safety forums in terms of disability. And it is a huge issue in terms of transportation. Which one is it? The arrows? Wasn't working. Okay, it's not me. Just want to say. Definitely not. The computer's tired today.
Tell me.
Sorry, guys.
So you need to change via the arrow here. I don't know why.
Okay. There's okay. Thank you. Okay, we started off looking at the Globe Status report on road safety, which lots of people have talked about today. We know that road injuries result in 1.3 million deaths worldwide per year. And the WHO considers children and older adults at risk on the road in terms of vulnerable road users, but also they highlight people with disabilities. So the World Health Organization estimates that over 1 billion people worldwide experience disability, and that's about 15% of the world's population. So it's a really important part of our population that sometimes gets neglected in terms of when we're talking about road safety. This percentage is increasing due to demographic trends. The population is getting older, particularly in Western societies. And also we have more issues with chronic health problems rather than infectious diseases. People are living longer in some developing countries. There's similar estimates in Canada, but there's 22% of people who actually report in terms of Statistics Canada that they have a disability. So this is a large population whose needs on the road need to be understood. So there was one systematic review by Young et al. They actually looked at all types of injuries. So disability was only one little part of it. And it was definitely associated with a higher risk of injury. And they only found one study that looked at risk in terms of pedestrian motor vehicle collisions and disability with an odds of 5.53. So 5 times greater odds if you're disabled to be involved in a motor vehicle collision. Just to provide some definitions in terms of the social model of disability, an impairment, it refers to bodily differences. For example, difficulty walking. So the actual bodily problems that you're having with something, whereas disability refers to the discrimination imposed on people with environments that exclude people, and social discrimination against inclusion. So the focus is to eliminate barriers for people with disabilities to participation. So the purpose of the scoping review of the literature was to look at what is known regarding the association between disability and the risk of pedestrian motor vehicle collisions, injuries, and fatalities. So that is the risk. And what are the actual risk factors for pedestrian road injury among disabled people? So Naomi went about creating the search strategy, and she reviewed 5 different databases, and she only found 62 studies. 13 that looked at risk of pedestrian collisions and injuries and fatalities, and 51 that looked at risk factors, and there's a bit of overlap. That's why it doesn't add up to 62. The academic fields that these papers encompassed included medicine, rehab science, epidemiology, urban planning, and social sciences. The inclusion criteria are English language, so that's kind of important to remember. And they only looked at quantitative studies. So studies that examine pedestrian road traffic collisions and injuries and fatalities among disabled people, studies that looked at severity, and they did a quality assessment and strength of evidence and rated it as high, medium, or low. Now, again, this is a scoping review. It wasn't a systematic review. It was felt more appropriate for this topic. And in terms of the quality, they looked at things like adequate sample size, proper identification of disability, use of appropriate control groups, controlled for age and sex, and whether disability and pedestrian road injury was the primary association that was studied. So first of all, I want to say all the studies are in high income countries. Partially, I guess that might have been the issue because they restricted the search to English speaking countries. And if you look at this, this graph, you can see anything on the other side of 1 that doesn't cross over 1 is significant. So there was a higher risk in all these studies of collisions among people with disabilities. And the studies encompassed all disability, sensory in terms of hearing, visual disabilities, cognitive developmental disabilities. There seems to be quite a few studies in terms of cognitive developmental disabilities, and one study looking at epilepsy. So there was definitely a higher risk of collisions among people with disabilities, but there was a lot of mixed results with regards to risk for greater injury severity. And the studies were generally of pretty low quality. Disability was not always reported in traffic databases, and the quality of the studies were not great according to the criteria that I described before. I'm just going to describe the risk factors. So the second objective, according to these 3 categories, individual risk factors. So those relate to sociodemographic and individualized issues related to the individual. The second, in their social scientist terminology, because it's not a terminology that I'm familiar with, but I became familiar with, is social relational. So this was social attitudes and behaviors to people with disabilities, and things like education and training. And these were considered more social kind of programs. And then the socio-environmental, so built environments associated with higher risks and policies. So in terms of individual risk factors, there was higher risk among males with disabilities. There's only 25 studies that looked at these types of things in terms of individualized risk factors, things like slower crossing speeds of the individual, crossing decisions. These indicate different ways people move about in the environment, but it also, these type of individual risk factors frames increased risk as an individual problem. So in over 60% of collisions, actually the disabled person is not actually at fault. So this way of looking at things does really have that blame the victim type of mentality. Social relational risk factors are more related to driver yielding behavior. So it seems like drivers yield to individuals with visual symbols of disability. So if you have a white cane or symbolizing blindness, they yield more, but they seem to be less yielding for wheelchair users. And it's particularly related to visibility. You can't see people in wheelchairs as easily because they're lower to the ground. A lot of the educational programs were in children, directed at children with intellectual disability. They found that training improved learning. However, all of us do know, and probably in this room, that education is not always or rarely associated specifically with greater safety. You may improve somebody's education, but they may not actually behave more safer on the roadways. In terms of social environmental risk factors, things that were in the environments that associated with more risk for people with disabilities was fast moving traffic, wider roads, two-way traffic, also related to areas lacking curbs, areas lacking audible pedestrian signals and roundabouts. And it seems like some of these results are quite unclear in terms of roundabouts. And also when you looked at policies, these were rarely evaluated. There was lack of traffic planning and consumer protection in policies related to people with disabilities and transportation, and lack of training for motorized mobility scooters and power wheelchairs. So to summarize, people with disabilities are at higher risk of pedestrian road injury. This is a really important population inequality. When we talk about equity a lot in road traffic, we tend to talk about socioeconomic status, marginalized communities, but for some reason, there doesn't seem to be a lot of attention paid to people with disabilities. There's very few high quality studies. There definitely needs to be better measures of disability and traffic data. I remember when we first started looking at police reports, the fields coded for disability were not coded well or were quite incomplete. In terms of risk factors, they are often understood at the individual level related to slower walking speeds and crossing decisions of disabled people, which again really leads to that blame the victim type of mentality. The social, relational, and environmental risk factors are less examined. And there are identified environmental risk factors, including high speed, wide, high volume roads, which are not just risk factors for people with disabilities, but for everybody. But we do need more accessible features, including curb cuts and audible pedestrian signals. And there's definitely a positive research in low-income countries where there tends to be a lot higher percentages of people with disabilities. So in terms of implications, disabled pedestrians experience increased risk on the road. We need for improved data collection on disability and road injury. And we ensure disability is accounted for in designs and operations of road environments, in terms of accessibility enhancements, and universally and inclusively designed streets. So if you have any questions, you can try me, but also Ron Bueling said to put up his email. I do want to say that we're actually quite excited. This is submitted to Health and Place, which is quite a prestigious journal in terms of health and geography. And it was reviewed with very minor edits to it. So hopefully this should be published in the next couple months. So anyways, thank you very much.
Wonderful summary for somebody that didn't know about what was happening with it. Anyway, Linda fooled us again. So we have lots of time for questions, conversations. You know, I'm intrigued by the fact that we understand problems, yet we don't implement solutions. That's a puzzling thing. My first question really to Linda is this question of disability. When do seniors start to enter into, you know, older people get into that realm of disability? I mean, even a dodgy knee might be considered disability. It's going to slow your rate of walking speed. Crossing distances are going to be more difficult. Just curious about sort of the commentary on that.
So in terms of disability, the health questionnaires, it means people will tick off whether or not they have a disability, but the definition is a long-term issue that causes difficulty with your daily living. So, you know, if you're having a short-term issue, most people would not tick off they have a disability.
Right.
If it's something, that's how it's defined in terms of the health and activity limitation surveys.
Great.
So a senior who's got a longer term issue would tick off, somebody who's just going to be through.
Yeah. Okay. Are there any questions? The group. Yes.
If there was anything about conflicting road injury needs with different impairments. So for example, someone who's wheeling would need a smooth surface, someone who has a vision impairment would need tactile to navigate. Is that at all in the literature that you read?
So in terms of conflicting
Needs, I guess.
So that would have been, I mean, this review was focused on this and this stuff. So I don't think it would have spread into that realm. And I don't even know quantitatively how easy it would be to get at that. And 100% qualitative studies are the way that that's the information that we got.
Okay, or should I remove? Okay, okay. So sadly, we didn't do that for that one. Are there any other questions? We can walk around. Yes, gentlemen, right at the back.
Thank you for the presentation. The leading author is someone else, but I would like to ask a question regarding the component of road user. It seems to me here that there was mostly pedestrians. So to what extent do you think it would be fair to integrate over road users with disabilities in this type of system?
So are you meaning like motor vehicle? Yeah, I was kind of thinking cyclists. that would be really interesting. I mean, for sure, it's important to consider all different road users. I know that their research is focused on vulnerable road users. We haven't done a lot in terms of what we call occupants right now. I'm sure there's room. I don't think that she would have looked at that. I do think she looked for studies. I wasn't able to find anything that would want to.
Are there other questions? I think this is even somewhat related. But what I'm curious about is now that the CA is looking at the data, what's your plans for it? Was it intended to inform internal policy, or was it intended to do other sort of satisfy other objectives?
The purpose of the survey was mainly to get an understanding of what Ontarians have as vulnerable users and also some of their awareness in some of these road safety strategies. And then we're able to use that data to identify gaps in awareness that needs to be made. So we're able to now incorporate that term vulnerable road users into more of what we do. And even when we're advocating for government or specific infrastructure, we're able to use that data to help strengthen those arguments.
More of an internal sort of process versus trying to influence your own membership, just contributing to the whole.
And we're able to use that data to contribute to the conversation and that change.
Other questions? I had a question for Allison in terms of the at fault. So the pedestrians, cyclists that were in those intersections was culpability assigned. And is there anything you can say about that?
I don't remember the exact numbers, but the majority of the views were crossing with right of way.
So they were in the right of way. Yeah, much like this. Okay, I don't think we have any other questions. As I said, we're closing this session earlier than expected, which is fine because there's posters to look at, and there may be some refreshments somewhere in the exhibit area as well for the vendor side. Again, thank you to our three presenters, Allison, Michael, and Linda. Thank